What would you do if your life was turned upside down in the blink of an eye? For Claire, a devoted wife and soon-to-be mother, everything seemed perfect until the birth of her triplets brought shocking revelations that shattered her world. Abandoned by her husband and left to face the unthinkable alone, Claire's journey is one of heartbreak, resilience, and the fierce love of a mother determined to protect her children. But just as she begins to rebuild her life, shadows from her past return, threatening to undo everything she's worked so hard to achieve. Will Claire find the strength to rise above it all? Can forgiveness and redemption heal wounds that run so deep? Or will the ghosts of yesterday keep her trapped forever? Dive into this emotional tale of resilience and hope, where love conquers betrayal and a mother's determination lights the darkest path. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if faced with Claire's challenges? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of strength and survival. Stay tuned, Claire's story begins now. The early morning sunlight filtered through the sheer, white curtains of Claire Morrison's bedroom, dappling the walls with golden streaks. Outside, the distant hum of traffic and chirping birds signaled another busy day in Chicago. Yet, inside the cozy apartment she shared with her husband Ethan, there was a stillness, a moment of quiet that Claire had come to cherish in her otherwise hectic life. Claire stretched beneath the covers, savoring the warmth of the bed. Beside her, Ethan was already up, his side of the bed neatly made, his scent lingering on the pillow. He was likely in the kitchen, engrossed in his morning routine of coffee and emails. For Claire, today was different. The plastic stick sitting on the bathroom counter had changed everything. She'd stared at it for what felt like hours, her heart racing at the two faint pink lines. She hadn't expected this. After years of trying, months of tracking cycles, and countless disappointments, she'd grown accustomed to disappointment. But this was real. Sliding out of bed, she padded across the cool floor, her robe cinched tightly around her. She paused in the doorway of the kitchen, taking in the sight of Ethan, seated at the small breakfast table. His laptop screen glowed in the dim light, his fingers tapping away on the keyboard. A mug of steaming coffee sat within reach. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice trembling. Ethan looked up, a smile breaking across his face. "Morning. You're up earlier than usual. Everything okay?" Claire couldn't hold it in any longer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pregnancy test, placing it on the table in front of him. "We're going to have a baby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Ethan just stared, his brow furrowed, and then his eyes widened as realization dawned. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and pulled her into his arms. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief and joy. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I took the test this morning. It's positive." Ethan laughed, spinning her around the kitchen. "This is amazing. We're going to be parents." The rest of the day was a blur of celebration. Ethan canceled his meetings, and they spent hours talking about baby names, nursery themes, and dreams for their growing family. Claire couldn't stop imagining tiny hands gripping her fingers, the sound of soft giggles filling their home. That night, as they lay in bed, Ethan wrapped an arm around her, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "This is the start of something wonderful," he murmured. Claire smiled, letting herself believe it. For the first time in years, everything felt perfect. 7 months later, Claire's world tilted. She clutched Ethan's hand tightly as the paramedics wheeled her into St. Andrew's Hospital. Her contractions had started hours earlier, sharp and relentless, catching her off guard as she prepared breakfast. Ethan had nearly dropped his coffee mug when she doubled over in pain. "It's too early," Claire had whispered, fear etched across her face. "We're going to the hospital," Ethan had said firmly, grabbing the car keys. Now, surrounded by the chaos of beeping monitors and rushing nurses, Claire fought to keep herself calm. Ethan's presence was her anchor, his voice steady as he whispered reassurances. "It's going to be okay," he said, brushing damp hair from her forehead. The delivery was anything but easy. Hours turned into an exhausting blur of pain and effort. Claire barely registered the doctor's words. 3 heartbeats. We're looking at triplets. Triplets. Her mind spun as the room filled with movement. Nurses and doctors surrounded her, their voices blending into a hum. She focused on Ethan, on the warmth of his hand in hers, grounding herself in the chaos. Almost there, the doctor said, "Just one more push." With a final, desperate effort, Claire felt the weight leave her body. Then came the cries, 3 distinct wails that filled the room. "They're here," the nurse announced, her tone light with joy. 3 healthy babies. Claire exhaled, relief washing over her. She turned her head, searching for Ethan's face, expecting to see the same joy reflected back at her. But he wasn't smiling. Ethan's expression had frozen. His eyes were wide, his face pale as he stared at the babies being cleaned and swaddled. "What's wrong?" Claire asked, panic creeping into her voice. Ethan didn't respond. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and stormed out of the delivery room without a word. Claire tried to call after him, but the exhaustion and confusion overwhelmed her. The nurse placed the swaddled babies in her arms, a girl, another girl, and a boy. Claire stared at their tiny faces, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. But her joy was tempered by a gnawing sense of unease. The next morning, Claire sat propped up in her hospital bed, her body sore, but her mind racing. The triplets slept soundly in the bassinet beside her. She kept glancing at the door, hoping Ethan would return with an apology or an explanation. When the door finally opened, her heart leapt until she saw his expression. Ethan walked in stiffly, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes were cold, his jaw tight. "Ethan," she began, her voice shaking, "where did you go? I've been worried. I need to talk to you," he said flatly. Claire's stomach churned. He dropped the duffel bag at the foot of her bed. "This is your stuff. You're not coming back to the apartment." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice rising. "Ethan, I don't understand." Ethan's lips curled into a sneer. "You don't understand? Look at them, Claire. Look at those babies. They're not mine." Claire's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you cheated on me." Ethan spat. "Don't lie, Claire. There's no way those kids are mine. Look at their skin." Claire's breath caught as she looked at her sleeping babies. Their skin was a deep brown, a stark contrast to her and Ethan's fair complexions. "I didn't cheat on you," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, I swear I have no idea why they look like this, but they're yours. They're ours." Ethan shook his head, his face hardening. "I can't do this. You've ruined everything." He turned and walked out, leaving Claire shattered. When Martha arrived at the hospital, Claire broke down, sobbing into her mother's arms. Martha didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She simply held her daughter, letting her cry until there were no tears left. "Let's get you home," Martha said softly, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. Claire nodded numbly, too exhausted to argue. Martha loaded Claire's belongings into the car, along with the triplets' tiny bundles. The drive back to Martha's suburban home was silent, the weight of Ethan's betrayal hanging heavy in the air. The first days were a blur. Claire struggled to bond with the babies, her emotions clouded by guilt and despair. Every time she looked at them, Ethan's accusations echoed in her mind. Martha took charge, feeding the triplets, changing diapers, and rocking them to sleep. She cooked meals Claire barely touched and offered words of encouragement Claire wasn't ready to hear. One night, Martha sat beside Claire on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "you're stronger than this. Those babies need you. And no matter what Ethan does, we'll figure this out together." Claire looked at her mother, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm scared, Mom. What if I can't do it?" "You already are," Martha said firmly. Claire glanced at the sleeping babies, their soft breaths filling the quiet room. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The days that followed Ethan's departure were agonizing. Each passing moment deepened Claire's sense of abandonment, a hollow ache in her chest that refused to fade. She stared at her phone, willing it to ring, but Ethan's silence was deafening. Martha had taken charge of everything, cooking meals Claire couldn't stomach, holding the babies when Claire's arms felt too heavy, and fielding calls from concerned friends and family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the living room in hues of amber and gold, Claire sat on the couch with Emma nestled against her chest. The baby's small hand curled around Claire's finger, her breath soft and rhythmic. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," Martha said gently, setting a plate of untouched food on the coffee table. "I don't know what to do," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "He won't answer my calls. He won't even give me a chance to explain." Martha sat beside her, her expression a mix of anger and empathy. "You've already explained. Ethan made his choice, and it was a cowardly one. But you have to stop chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught." Claire's eyes brimmed with tears. "I loved him, Mom. I thought we were happy. How did it fall apart so fast?" Martha reached for her hand. "Because life isn't always fair. But you have 3 beautiful reasons to keep going. Don't let him take away your strength." That night, Claire tried to care for the triplets on her own. She wanted to prove to herself more than anyone that she was capable of being their mother. Emma was the first to cry, her shrill wail echoing through the small house. Claire stumbled out of bed, exhaustion weighing her limbs like lead. As she cradled Emma, Noah's cries joined the chorus, followed by Grace's. "Oh, come on," Claire muttered, her voice trembling as she bounced Emma in her arms. She tried to soothe them one by one, her movements frantic and unsure. But the cries only grew louder, their tiny faces scrunched in distress. Martha appeared in the doorway, her hair disheveled from sleep. Without a word, she scooped up Noah and began rocking him gently. Her presence, calm and steady, was a lifeline. "It's okay to ask for help," Martha said softly, her voice cutting through Claire's frustration. Claire nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she held Emma close. I wanted to do it myself, to prove I can." "You don't have to prove anything," Martha said. "You're doing the best you can, and that's more than enough." By the time the babies settled, the first light of dawn peeked through the curtains. Claire collapsed onto the couch, her body aching, but her heart a little lighter. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and chaotic days. Slowly, Claire began to find her footing. She learned how to time feedings so that all 3 babies could eat without complete meltdowns. She figured out which lullabies worked best for Grace and how to hold Noah just right to ease his colic. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the living room, Emma let out her first laugh, a soft, melodic sound that filled the room with joy. Claire froze, a pile of tiny onesies in her lap. "Mom," she called, her voice filled with wonder. Martha hurried in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What is it, Emma?" Claire said, tears welling in her eyes. She laughed. Martha crouched beside her, watching as Emma giggled again, her little hands reaching for the ceiling. "She's happy," Martha said, smiling, "because she has a mom who loves her." For the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself to smile. Venturing out of the house for the first time felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Claire loaded the triplets into their car seats with Martha's help, double-checking every buckle and strap. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you?" Martha asked, concern etched across her face. "I need to do this," Claire replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. The grocery store was bustling with activity, the aisles filled with the chatter of families and the hum of shopping carts. Claire maneuvered the stroller carefully, the triplets tucked inside like precious cargo. At first, she felt invisible, blending into the crowd. But as she stopped to pick up a pack of diapers, she caught the whispered comments. "3 babies?" One woman murmured to her friend. "Poor thing. I bet the dad couldn't handle it," the other replied. Claire's cheeks burned, her grip tightening on the stroller. She wanted to snap back, to tell them they didn't know her story, but she held her tongue. By the time she reached the checkout line, her nerves were frayed. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, smiled at her. "You've got your hands full," he said, nodding at the triplets. Claire managed a small smile. "You could say that." As she loaded the bags into the car, she felt the weight of the stairs and whispers pressing down on her. But she also felt something else, a quiet pride. She had done it. One evening, after the triplets were asleep, Claire sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The night air was cool, the sounds of crickets and distant traffic filling the silence. Martha joined her, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Today was a good day," Martha said, her voice warm. Claire nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It was." The babies laughed. "I went to the store. It feels like maybe I can do this." "You can," Martha said firmly. "And you will." As Claire looked out at the darkened street, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Mornings at Martha's house began with chaos. The triplets were now 6 months old, and their synchronized cries were an alarm clock Claire could never snooze. Despite the exhaustion, she forced herself to rise, shuffling into the nursery with a determination that had become second nature. "Morning, kiddos," she said softly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes as she bent to pick up Emma, the loudest of the three. Her mother appeared in the doorway moments later, already dressed and with a cup of coffee in hand. "I've got Noah," Martha said, moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised a child before. "Thanks, Mom," Claire murmured, smiling faintly. Mornings blended into afternoons, afternoons into evenings, as Claire found herself trapped in a cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Yet within the monotony, she began to find her rhythm. Each small success, a feeding without tears, a peaceful nap, or even a simple giggle from one of the babies, felt monumental. One night, as she sat rocking Grace to sleep, Claire glanced at the framed photograph on the mantel, a picture of her and Ethan on their wedding day. She'd avoided looking at it for months, but now her gaze lingered. "You walked away from this," she whispered to the empty room. "But I'm still here." Her voice carried no anger, only resolve. Martha had always been Claire's rock, but the depth of her mother's support became more evident as the weeks turned into months. One evening, after the triplets were asleep, Claire joined her mother at the kitchen table. Martha was carefully clipping coupons from a circular, her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "You don't have to do that," Claire said, sinking into a chair across from her. "I don't mind," Martha replied without looking up. "Every little bit helps." Claire hesitated. "Mom, you've already done so much. I feel like I'm just taking from you." Martha set the scissors down and met Claire's eyes. "You're not taking. We're family, Claire. This is what we do for each other." "But you should be enjoying your retirement," Claire said, her voice tinged with guilt. "Not raising 3 babies with me." Martha's expression softened. "Those babies are my grandchildren, and you're my daughter. There's nowhere else I'd rather be." Claire reached across the table, squeezing her mother's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Martha smiled. "You do the same for me." As the triplets approached their first birthday, Claire knew she couldn't rely solely on her mother's support forever. The cost of diapers, formula, and baby clothes was mounting, and she needed to find a way to contribute financially. She spent nights scouring job boards, her laptop balanced precariously on the arm of the couch. Most positions required hours she couldn't manage or qualifications she didn't have. One morning, she found a listing for a receptionist position at a nearby clinic. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were flexible, and it seemed manageable. Claire dressed in her best outfit, simple blouse and slacks, and left the triplets with Martha. As she walked into the clinic, her nerves threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to take steady breaths. The interview went smoothly, and by the end of the week, Claire received the call. "We'd like to offer you the position," the manager said warmly. Claire hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't her dream job, but it was a start. Juggling work and motherhood was a challenge Claire hadn't fully anticipated. Mornings began before the sun rose, with feedings, diaper changes, and hurried goodbyes. She dropped the triplets off at a nearby daycare she could barely afford before rushing to the clinic for her shift. At work, she managed patient check-ins, answered phones, and dealt with the occasional frustrated parent. The steady rhythm of her tasks provided a strange sense of normalcy, a reprieve from the chaos of home. But by the time her shift ended, exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. She would pick up the triplets, haul them home, and dive into the evening routine of baths, bottles, and bedtime stories. One night, as she collapsed onto the couch after the triplets were asleep, Martha sat beside her. "How are you holding up?" her mother asked. Claire sighed. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. But you're keeping it above water, Martha said gently. That's what matters. The triplets were 2 years old when Claire began to notice the small victories that made the chaos worthwhile. Emma, with her boundless energy, loved to climb onto the couch and jump off with a squeal of delight. Noah was quieter, often sitting with a book and babbling as if he were reading aloud. Grace, ever the artist, spent hours drawing with crayons, her tiny hands smudged with vibrant colors. One evening, as Claire sat on the floor playing with the children, Emma toddled over and wrapped her arms around Claire's neck. "Love you, Mommy," Emma said, her voice sweet and clear. Claire froze, tears springing to her eyes. She pulled Emma close, her heart swelling with a mix of love and pride. "I love you too, sweetheart," she whispered. Moments like this reminded her why she fought so hard. By the time the triplets were 3, Claire had begun to feel a sense of stability she hadn't experienced in years. She'd received a small promotion at work, her performance as a receptionist earning her the respect of her colleagues. The extra pay allowed her to enroll the triplets in a better daycare, easing some of the financial strain. One day, as she stood in the daycare parking lot watching the triplets play on the jungle gym, a fellow parent approached her. "You've got your hands full," the woman said, smiling. Claire nodded, laughing softly. "Every day. But they're so happy," the woman added. "You're doing a great job." The words took Claire by surprise. She'd spent so long doubting herself, questioning whether she was enough. Hearing someone else acknowledge her efforts felt like a validation she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. That night, as she tucked the triplets in a bed, Claire sat by their cribs for a moment longer than usual. Watching their peaceful faces, she whispered, "We're going to be okay." For the first time, she truly believed it. Life had settled into a predictable, if exhausting, rhythm. Claire's days began with the early cries of the triplets and ended with the soft hum of the baby monitor as they slept. Work filled the hours in between, a steady stream of tasks that left her physically drained but thankful for the stability her job provided. Still, the weight of her responsibilities was unrelenting. One particularly hectic evening, Claire arrived home to find Noah crying inconsolably, Emma demanding a snack, and Grace clinging to Martha's leg. The sight of her mother's weary expression only added to Claire's guilt. "Let me take them," Claire said quickly, setting down her bag and scooping Noah into her arms. "They've been fussy all day," Martha said, her voice gentle but tired. "Noah's coming down with a cold, I think." Claire nodded, pressing a kiss to Noah's damp forehead. "Go rest, Mom. I'll take it from here." But even as she spoke, Claire wondered how she would manage. She moved through the evening routine on autopilot, her body aching with exhaustion. By the time the triplets were finally asleep, she sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her struggle. But then she thought of Emma's laughter, Noah's quiet curiosity, and Grace's wide-eyed wonder. They were worth every sleepless night and moment of doubt. One day at the clinic, Claire's manager approached her with a clipboard in hand. "Claire, I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his tone warm. Claire's stomach tightened. She'd been working harder than ever, but the thought of criticism still made her nervous. "We've been really impressed with your work," he continued. "You're dependable, great with patients, and always willing to go the extra mile. Have you ever thought about training as a medical assistant?" Claire blinked in surprise. I haven't actually. Would I even qualify?" "We'd sponsor your training," the manager said with a smile. "You've got what it takes, Claire. Think about it." The offer stayed with her for days. At first, Claire was hesitant. Balancing her current workload with raising the triplets was hard enough. Could she really take on more? She called Martha for advice during her lunch break one afternoon. "You should do it," Martha said without hesitation. "It's a chance to move forward, Claire. I'll handle things at home." The idea of building a better future for her children gave Claire the courage to accept the opportunity. The next few months were some of the busiest of Claire's life. Training as a medical assistant meant attending evening classes after work and spending late nights studying while the triplets slept. Martha stepped up, taking on more responsibility at home so Claire could focus on her training. Even so, the strain was palpable. One evening, as Claire sat at the kitchen table poring over her notes, Emma toddled over with her favorite book in hand. "Read to me, Mommy," she said, her eyes wide with expectation. Claire hesitated, guilt prickling at her heart. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. Mommy has to study tonight." Emma's face fell, and she shuffled away, clutching the book to her chest. Claire watched her go, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to give her children everything, but the sacrifices were harder than she'd anticipated. Later that night, as she tucked Emma into bed, Claire kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm doing this for you, my love. One day, you'll understand." The triplets' second birthday was a modest but joyful celebration. Claire and Martha spent the morning decorating the small dining room with balloons and streamers, the bright colors adding a festive warmth to their home. Emma, Noah, and Grace squealed with delight as they opened their gifts, simple toys that Claire had carefully budgeted for. "Happy birthday, my loves," Claire said, pulling them into a group hug. Martha snapped a photo, capturing the moment of laughter and love. Later, as Claire scrolled through the pictures on her phone, she felt a swell of pride. They were building a life together, piece by piece. One evening, as Claire picked up the triplets from daycare, she noticed another parent struggling with a fussy toddler. The woman, dressed in scrubs, looked frazzled but determined. "Need a hand?" Claire offered, balancing Grace on one hip. The woman smiled gratefully. "That would be amazing, thank you." They walked to the parking lot together, exchanging pleasantries. Claire learned that the woman, Samantha, was a single mother working as a nurse at a nearby hospital. "It's not easy, is it?" Samantha said with a laugh. "Not even a little," Claire replied. "But it's worth it." They exchanged numbers before parting ways, and over the next few weeks, a friendship blossomed. Samantha became a source of support for Claire, offering advice, encouragement, and the occasional babysitting favor. For the first time in years, Claire felt less alone. By the time Claire completed her training, she was offered a promotion at the clinic. The new role came with better pay and more responsibilities, but it also represented a significant step forward. When she told the triplets about her new job, Emma clapped her hands excitedly. "You're the best mommy ever." Claire laughed, pulling her children into a hug. "No, you're the best kids ever." The triplets had grown so much over the past few years, their personalities shining brighter with each passing day. Emma's adventurous spirit, Noah's quiet thoughtfulness, and Grace's artistic flair filled Claire's life with joy and purpose. As she tucked them into bed that night, Claire reflected on how far they'd come. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She was stronger now, more resilient, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream about the future. Claire's life had settled into a fragile balance. The triplets were now 4 years old and thriving at their new daycare. Claire had found her footing as a medical assistant, earning the respect of her colleagues and the gratitude of patients. Evenings were a flurry of activity: dinner, baths, bedtime stories, but Claire relished the chaos. After years of uncertainty, she finally felt like she was in control. One morning, as she sipped her coffee and prepared for the day, a knock at the door startled her. Claire frowned, glancing at the clock. It was too early for visitors. She opened the door to find no one there, just a plain white envelope sitting on the welcome mat. Her stomach twisted as she bent to pick it up. Inside was a single piece of paper, the handwriting jagged and angry. "You'll pay for what you did." Claire's hands trembled. She stepped back into the house, locking the door behind her. "Mama, what's wrong?" Grace asked, tugging on Claire's sleeve. Claire forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a silly note." But as she tucked the paper into her pocket, unease crept over her. At first, Claire convinced herself it was a harmless prank. But over the next few weeks, more notes appeared. One was tucked under her windshield wiper at work. "You can't hide forever." Another was slipped into the triplets' daycare cubby. "I see you." Claire's anxiety grew with each note. She couldn't ignore the similarities to the messages Ethan had sent years ago. Was he back? One evening, as she sat on the couch with Samantha, she confided her fears. "I think it's Ethan," Claire said, her voice trembling. "Who else would do this?" Samantha frowned. "Have you gone to the police?" Claire hesitated. "I'm scared they won't take me seriously." What if it just makes things worse? Samantha placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You need to protect yourself and your kids, reported Claire. The next day, Claire went to the local police station. The officers took her statement and promised to increase patrols around her home. But without evidence or witnesses, there was little they could do. The notes escalated. One morning, Claire found one taped to her front door. You'll never be safe. She installed security cameras around the house, triple-checked the locks each night, and kept her phone within arm's reach at all times. Her fear began to seep into her daily life. At work, she jumped every time the phone rang. At the daycare, she scanned the parking lot for unfamiliar cars. Even at home, she couldn't relax. The triplets noticed her tension. Mommy, are you okay? Noah asked one evening as Claire tucked him into bed. Claire forced a smile. I'm just tired, sweetheart. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine, and Claire knew it. One crisp autumn afternoon, Claire picked up the triplets from daycare. As they climbed into the car, Emma handed her a folded piece of paper. A man gave this to us, Emma said. Claire's heart stopped. What man? Emma shrugged. He was standing by the fence. He said to give it to you. Claire unfolded the note, her hands trembling. The message was short but chilling. I'll always find you. Tears stung Claire's eyes as she hugged the triplets tightly. Did he touch you? Say anything else? No, Noah said, frowning. He just gave us the note. Claire drove straight to the police station, her mind racing. This time, the officers took her fears seriously. They promised to increase their patrols and monitor the daycare for suspicious activity. Back at home, Claire couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every shadow outside the window sent her heart racing. The final straw came one evening when Claire returned home from work to find a note taped to the triplets' bedroom window. I'm closer than you think. She called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, the area was clear. The officers recommended she consider relocating for her safety. Claire's heart sank. She'd spent years building a life in this town, creating stability for her children. But their safety came first. I have to do this, Claire told Samantha that night as they packed boxes in the dimly lit living room. I can't let him hurt my kids. Samantha hugged her tightly. You're doing the right thing, and you're stronger than you know. Martha agreed to move with Claire, providing much-needed support as they relocated to a quieter city hour away. The triplets didn't understand why they had to leave, their tearful goodbyes to friends breaking Claire's heart. It's just for now, she reassured them. We'll make new friends. I promise. Their new home was a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The triplets adjusted quickly, their resilience a constant source of inspiration for Claire. She enrolled them in a new daycare and started a job at a nearby hospital. For the first time in months, Claire felt a glimmer of hope. The notes had stopped, and the tight knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. One evening, as she watched the triplets play in the backyard, Emma ran over with a handful of wildflowers. These are for you, Mommy, she said, beaming. Claire knelt down, her heart swelling. Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful. As she held the flowers to her chest, Claire realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Even in the new city, Claire couldn't fully shake the paranoia that had become her constant companion. Every knock on the door startled her. Every unfamiliar face in the neighborhood triggered an internal alarm. The triplets, however, seemed to thrive in their new environment. Emma had joined a small soccer team at daycare, her boundless energy making her a natural leader. Noah had found joy in puzzles, spending hours fitting pieces together with quiet concentration. Grace, ever the artist, insisted on painting every day, her hands often stained with bright colors. One evening, as the triplets played in the living room, Claire stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the darkened street. Mommy! Emma's voice broke her reverie. Claire turned, forcing a smile. What is it, sweetie? Why do you look outside so much? Emma asked, tilting her head. Claire hesitated, searching for the right words. I'm just making sure everything's safe. It's my job to protect you. Emma seemed satisfied with the answer, skipping back to her siblings. But Claire's chest tightened. How long could she keep living like this, always looking over her shoulder, always bracing for the worst? Just when Claire started to believe the past was behind her, the notes returned. It started with a single envelope, tucked under the windshield wiper of her car at work. Claire's heart sank as she opened it, her breath catching at the familiar jagged handwriting. You can run, but you can't hide. Her hands trembled as she stuffed the note into her bag, her pulse racing. That evening, she sat on her bed, the note spread out in front of her, while Martha hovered nearby. Are you sure it's him? Martha asked, her voice low. It has to be, Claire replied. Who else would do this? Martha sighed, her worry etched into every line of her face. You need to report this. I will, Claire promised. But the fear gnawed at her. She'd reported the notes before, and nothing had changed. Would it be any different this time? The next morning, Claire dropped the triplets off at daycare and went straight to the local police station. She handed the note to the officer at the front desk, explaining her history with Ethan and the ongoing harassment. We'll open a file, the officer said, his tone professional but non-committal. In the meantime, stay vigilant. Claire nodded, though the response did little to ease her anxiety. That evening, as she reviewed the footage from the security cameras she'd installed around the apartment, something caught her eye. In the grainy footage, a shadowy figure moved past the driveway, lingering near the fence. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours before the note appeared on her car. Claire's stomach twisted. She replayed the footage, pausing at the figure's silhouette. Though the image was blurry, something about the posture felt eerily familiar. She forwarded the video to the police, attaching a message that read, I think this is him. Determined not to let fear control her, Claire began taking steps to protect herself and the triplets. She enrolled in a self-defense class, spending her evenings learning how to defend against potential threats. The instructor, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Teresa, quickly became a source of strength for Claire. You're doing great, Teresa said one night as Claire practiced breaking free from a simulated chokehold. I don't feel great, Claire admitted, wiping sweat from her brow. Confidence takes time, Teresa said, but you're stronger than you think. The words stayed with Claire. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of empowerment amidst the fear. A week later, as Claire arrived at daycare to pick up the triplets, she noticed a commotion near the playground. A teacher was speaking to a security guard, her expression tense. What's going on? Claire asked, her heart pounding. There was a man lingering by the fence, the teacher said. He didn't approach the kids, but he was watching them. When we went out to confront him, he left. Claire's blood ran cold. Did you get a good look at him? The teacher shook her head. Not really, but he seemed off. Claire immediately reported the incident to the police, her fear escalating. The thought of Ethan or anyone getting so close to her children was unbearable. That night, she slept with a chair wedged under the doorknob and the security system armed. The harassment reached its peak one rainy evening. Claire had just put the triplets to bed when a loud knock sounded at the door. Her breath caught as she glanced at the monitor displaying the security camera feed. A man stood on the porch, his hood pulled low over his face. Who is it? She called, her voice trembling. No answer. Go away, or I'm calling the police. The man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Claire called the police, her hands shaking as she described the encounter. When the officers arrived, they searched the area but found no trace of the man. This can't go on, Martha said after they left. You need to get out of here, Claire. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had no choice. For her children's safety, she had to leave everything behind again. Packing up their lives for the second time was an emotional ordeal. The triplets didn't understand why they had to leave their new home, their friends, and the life they'd begun to build. Why are we going, Mommy? Noah asked, his eyes wide with confusion. Claire knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Because I need to keep you safe, she said softly. The new city was even smaller than the last, tucked away in a quiet corner of the state. The apartment they rented was modest but cozy, and Claire took comfort in its anonymity. As she unpacked the last of the boxes, she stood in the middle of the living room and took a deep breath. This was a chance to start over again. The move to a quieter city brought a much-needed sense of relief. Claire chose the small town carefully, its streets lined with oak trees, friendly neighbors who kept to themselves, and a daycare within walking distance. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a haven. Their new apartment, though smaller than the last, was cozy. The triplets each had their own corner to play, and the kitchen overlooked a small yard. Claire spent her first days unpacking boxes, hanging curtains, and arranging furniture, trying to make the space feel like home. Martha, as always, was a steady presence. She took charge of decorating the living room, adding warm touches like throw pillows and a family photo wall. "I think this is going to be good for us," Martha said one evening as they sat on the couch, watching the triplets play. Claire nodded, her chest tight with a mix of hope and fear. "I hope so, Mom. I really do." Claire wasted no time finding a new job. The local hospital was hiring medical assistants, and her experience and certifications made her an ideal candidate. Within weeks, she was back in scrubs, juggling patient charts and appointments. Her new colleagues were welcoming, their easygoing demeanor a refreshing change from the high-pressure environment she'd left behind. "You're going to fit in just fine here," her supervisor said on her first day. At home, Claire worked hard to establish a routine for the triplets. She enrolled them in a nearby daycare and made sure to walk them there each morning, holding their small hands as they skipped along the sidewalk. "Are we staying here forever, Mommy?" Grace asked one morning, her voice hopeful. Claire hesitated before answering. "We're going to stay for as long as it's safe," she said. Grace seemed satisfied with the answer, her tiny hand tightening around Claire's. For the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to relax. The triplets were thriving, making new friends and filling the apartment with laughter. Emma loved the jungle gym at daycare and often came home with grass-stained knees. Noah had developed a fascination with building blocks, constructing elaborate towers and bridges. Grace spent hours drawing, her creations proudly displayed on the fridge. One Saturday afternoon, Claire decided to take the children to the park. The day was sunny and warm, the kind of weather that begged for outdoor adventures. As the triplets ran ahead to the playground, Claire sat on a bench, watching them with a mix of pride and gratitude. They were her reason for everything, for the sacrifices, the fear, and the constant fight to rebuild. "You've done a good job, you know," Martha said, sitting beside her. Claire smiled, her eyes misty. "I hope so." Martha placed a hand on hers. "They're happy, Claire, and so are you." In their new town, Claire began to form connections. One of the other parents at daycare, a kind woman named Rachel, struck up a conversation one afternoon during pickup. "You're the mom of the triplets, right?" Rachel asked, smiling. "That's me," Claire replied, laughing softly. Rachel invited Claire to a small gathering of local moms, where they exchanged stories, advice, and a lot of laughter. For the first time in years, Claire felt a sense of belonging. As the weeks went by, Claire and Rachel's friendship deepened. They took turns hosting playdates and became each other's go-to for babysitting favors. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Rachel asked one evening as they sat on Claire's porch, sipping tea while the children played inside. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "More than I ever thought I could handle." Rachel smiled. "Well, you're stronger than most people I know." At work, Claire's dedication didn't go unnoticed. Her supervisor called her into the office one afternoon with a smile. "We've been impressed with your performance," she said. "We'd like to offer you a promotion." Claire blinked, her heart racing. "Really? It comes with a pay increase and more responsibilities," the supervisor continued. "But I think you're more than capable." Claire accepted the promotion, grateful for the opportunity to provide more for her children. The extra income allowed her to make small improvements to their lives: new clothes for the triplets, fresh paint for their apartment, and a membership to the local community center. That same week, the triplets turned 5. Claire threw them a small party at the park, decorating a picnic table with balloons and streamers. Their smiles as they blew out their candles were a reminder of how far they'd come. The joy of the triplets' birthday was shattered when, in the middle of the celebration, Claire noticed a man standing near the park's edge. Her breath caught as recognition set in. It was Ethan. He looked different, thinner, wearier, and somehow smaller. When their eyes met, he took a hesitant step forward. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling. Claire's heart pounded. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you." Ethan said. Please. Martha, sensing the tension, stepped in to guide the children away. Claire followed Ethan to a secluded corner of the park, her mind racing. I'm sorry, Ethan began. For everything. Claire crossed her arms, her voice cold. You don't get to show up and say that after everything you've done. Ethan's face crumpled. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've changed. I want to make things right. Claire stared at him, her emotions swirling anger, disbelief, and a faint flicker of pity. You walked away when I needed you most, she said. You don't get to come back now. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked away. That night, Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at the birthday decorations still taped to the walls. The encounter with Ethan had dredged up old wounds, but it also reinforced something she already knew. She didn't need him. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and she had built it with love, determination, and the unwavering support of her mother. As she tucked the triplets in a bed, Emma looked up at her. Are we safe now, Mommy? Claire smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. Yes, sweetheart, we're safe. And for the first time in years, Claire truly believed it. The morning after Ethan's appearance at the park, Claire couldn't shake the tension that had settled in her chest. His words echoed in her mind. I've changed. I want to make things right. She sat at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee as Martha prepared breakfast for the triplets. Are you going to tell me what's on your mind? Martha asked, placing a plate of toast in front of her. Claire sighed, pushing the plate aside. He wants to fix things. Martha paused, her expression guarded. And do you believe him? I don't know, Claire admitted. Part of me wants to, for the kid's sake. But I can't forget what he did. Martha sat down across from her. Claire, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean you owe him anything. You've built a life without him. Don't let him come in and shake it. Claire nodded, though the weight of the decision lingered. That evening, as Claire read bedtime stories to the triplets, Emma interrupted her. Mommy, who was the man at the park? She asked, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. Claire froze. The question she'd been dreading had finally come. Claire hesitated, searching for the right words. He was someone from before, someone who made mistakes and hurt us. But he's not part of our lives now. Was he bad? Noah asked, his voice soft. Claire shook her head. He made bad choices, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. Sometimes people don't know how to handle things the right way. Grace looked up from her coloring book. Will he come back? I don't know, Claire admitted. But if he does, I'll always protect you. You don't have to worry about that. The triplets seemed satisfied with her answer, though Claire's heart ached at the thought of how much she'd have to explain someday. Despite the lingering uncertainty, Claire focused on moving forward. She threw herself into her new role at work, organizing patient charts and assisting with procedures. Her confidence grew as she mastered new skills, earning praise from her supervisor. You've been a game changer around here, the supervisor said one afternoon. Have you thought about pursuing more certifications? Claire smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Not yet, but I might. At home, the triplets continued to thrive. Emma's soccer team advanced to a local championship, and Claire found herself cheering on the sidelines with other parents. Noah's love for building led him to construct a detailed replica of their apartment using toy blocks, complete with a tiny model of their cat. Grace, ever creative, painted a vibrant mural on the wall of her room with Martha's help. One evening, as they all sat in the living room watching a movie, Claire looked around at her family and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They were happy. They were safe. And that was enough. Weeks passed without any further sign of Ethan, and Claire began to believe he had truly walked away. But one evening, as she sorted through the mail, she found a thick envelope addressed to her in familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing several pages of lined paper covered in Ethan's scrawled writing. The letter was an apology, long and rambling, filled with regrets and explanations. Ethan wrote about his guilt over leaving, his struggles after losing everything, and his desire to be a father to the triplets. I know I can't undo what I've done, the letter read, but I want to try. Please let me be part of their lives, even if it's just a small part. Claire's chest tightened. She folded the letter and set it aside, unsure of how to respond. That night, as she lay awake, she thought about what forgiveness would mean not just for Ethan, but for herself. The next day, Claire called Samantha, her closest friend in the new town. They met at a local coffee shop, where Claire handed over the letter. Samantha read it carefully, her brow furrowed. When she finished, she set it down and looked at Claire. "What do you want to do?" Samantha asked. "I don't know," Claire admitted. "Part of me wants to give him a chance, but the other part, I don't trust him. I don't know if I ever will." Samantha nodded thoughtfully. "You don't have to decide right now. Take your time. And remember, whatever you choose, it has to be what's best for you and the kids." Claire smiled weakly. "Thanks. I needed to hear that." A few nights later, Claire sat with Martha in the living room after the triplets were asleep. She handed her mother the letter, watching as Martha read it in silence. When Martha finished, she set the letter down and met Claire's gaze. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the triplets," Claire said. "About what they'd want, and what they deserve." Martha nodded. "They deserve a mother who's happy and confident in her choices. That's what matters most." Claire took a deep breath. "Then I think I need to see him one last time. Not for me, but for them." Claire arranged to meet Ethan at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As she walked in, her stomach churned with nerves. Ethan was already there, seated at a corner table, his hands fidgeting with a cup of coffee. "Claire," he said as she approached, his voice tinged with both hope and regret. She sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. "I got your letter." Ethan nodded. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I'm here for the kids," Claire said firmly. "If you want to be part of their lives, it's going to take more than words. You have to prove it." "I will," Ethan promised. "Whatever it takes." Claire studied him, searching for sincerity. "This is your chance, Ethan. Don't waste it." Ethan's promise to prove himself wasn't something Claire took lightly. She set firm boundaries, allowing only supervised visits at first. Once a week, Ethan met the triplets at a local park under Claire's watchful eye. The first meeting was awkward. Ethan sat stiffly on the bench as the triplets played nearby, stealing glances at him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Hi," Ethan said when Emma finally approached him, holding a soccer ball. "Do you play?" she asked, tilting her head. Ethan smiled hesitantly. "I used to. Want to show me how good you are?" Emma nodded, kicking the ball toward him. Soon, Noah and Grace joined in, their laughter echoing through the park. Claire watched from a distance, her emotions a whirlwind. "He's trying," Martha said, sitting beside her. Claire sighed. "I just hope it's enough." Over the next few months, the visits became more natural. Ethan began bringing small gifts, a set of paints for Grace, a science kit for Noah, a new soccer ball for Emma. Each gesture was met with cautious acceptance, the triplets slowly warming to his presence. One afternoon, Ethan and Noah sat on the grass, assembling a model rocket. Claire watched from a bench, her heart aching as she saw the concentration on Noah's face and the pride in Ethan's eyes. "Do you think he'll stick around this time?" Samantha asked, sitting beside Claire. Claire shrugged. "I want to believe he will, for their sake." But even as she said it, doubt lingered in her mind. Just as things seemed to be improving, Ethan missed a visit. The triplets waited at the park, their excitement turning to disappointment as the minutes ticked by. "Where is he?" Emma asked, her brow furrowed. "I don't know, sweetheart," Claire said, her voice tight. When Ethan finally called hours later, his voice was laced with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Claire. Something came up at work. Do you know what you've done?" Claire snapped. "They were waiting for you, Ethan. You can't just let them down like this." "I'll make it up to them," Ethan said. "You'd better," Claire replied, hanging up. That night, as she tucked the triplets into bed, Claire saw the hurt in their eyes. It reminded her of why she'd been so hesitant to let Ethan back into their lives. Ethan showed up early for the next visit, his demeanor earnest. He apologized to the triplets, crouching to their level as he spoke. "I messed up," he said, "and I'm sorry. I'll do better. I promise." The triplets seemed to accept his apology, though their trust would take time to rebuild. Ethan kept his word. He arrived early for every visit, bringing games, stories, and an open heart. Slowly, He began to earn back the trust he had shattered years ago. One evening, as they walked home from the park, Noah turned to Claire. "I think Daddy's trying really hard." Claire smiled softly. "I think so too, sweetheart." As the months passed, Ethan's role in the triplets' lives grew. He attended Emma's soccer games, cheered for Noah at his science fair, and proudly displayed Grace's artwork in his apartment. Claire maintained her boundaries, but she couldn't deny the changes she saw in Ethan. He was present, reliable, and genuinely invested in being a father. One evening, after a particularly successful family outing, Ethan turned to Claire. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Claire nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Don't thank me, Ethan. Thank them. They're the reason you're here." By the time the triplets turned 6, life had taken on a new rhythm. Ethan's involvement brought a sense of stability to their lives, allowing Claire to focus on her own growth. At work, she pursued additional certifications, earning a promotion to senior medical assistant. The increased income allowed her to move into a larger apartment, complete with a backyard where the triplets could play. Martha, ever supportive, reveled in the peace that had finally settled over their family. "You've come a long way," she said one evening as they sipped tea on the porch. "We all have," Claire replied, her gaze soft. One rainy afternoon, as the triplets napped, Claire sat down to write a letter. It wasn't for Ethan, but for herself, a way to release the pain, anger, and fear she had carried for so long. She wrote about the betrayal, the struggles, and the strength she discovered within herself. When she finished, she folded the letter and placed it in a box with other mementos from the past. She didn't need to keep it anymore, but she wasn't ready to throw it away. That evening, as she tucked the triplets in a bed, Emma hugged her tightly. "I love you, Mommy," she said. Claire smiled, her heart full. "I love you too, sweetheart." And in that moment, she felt free. Years later, Claire stood in the backyard, watching as the triplets, now teenagers, played soccer, painted, and tinkered with a new invention. Ethan arrived shortly after, joining them with a warm smile. His presence, once a source of pain, had become a reminder of how far they'd come. Martha sat nearby, her laughter mingling with the sounds of the family she had helped hold together. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To us," she said, "to everything we've overcome." The triplets clinked their glasses with hers, their smiles bright and full of hope. Claire knew the future would bring challenges, but she was no longer afraid. Together, they had built a life filled with love, resilience, and endless possibilities. Love Claire's journey? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button if this story inspired you, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales of strength, resilience, and hope. What would you have done in Claire's shoes? Share your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay strong and keep believing in new beginnings.